I'm back again, my friends. What's good? In today's video, we are going to be responding to EazyOnMe's video, Ben Shapiro, Christian Stupidity. Pretty much what I saw in this video was a lot of bad arguments based on a ton of ignorance or possibly deliberate dishonesty. He seems to be quite full of himself and massive arrogance, so it's going to be fun knocking down this dude several pegs. With that said, let's jump right in.
I'm back to dissing the right wing. I've been through Milo and I've been through Lauren, so it only makes sense that I diss the one dude that nobody ever responds to. So here's one beautiful destruction of Ben Shapiro.
Now, I don't want to give people the idea that this video is so much about defending Shapiro as much as it's about correcting what he says about Christianity and or religion. As much as I do admire Shapiro, this isn't the primary point in this video. Because I'm sure if Shapiro has seen or ever sees this video, he could easily speak for himself and tear the guy apart. With either Shapiro or myself destroying his nonsense, his so-called beautiful destruction is only going to reflect him doing a better job of destroying himself rather than Shapiro, religion, or Christianity. I must say that is some chill music right there. I can definitely appreciate his taste.
Nobody can deny that Ben Shapiro is one of the smartest conservatives out there. There's no doubt about that. He's fucking brilliant at proving people wrong. I just happen to be better. No, but really, at the end of the day, he's only human. Like a lot of conservatives, he's dead wrong when it comes to religion.
I don't deny that way too many conservatives get things wrong about religion, but so do a lot of liberals and other non-conservatives. Groups outside conservatives are not immune from being criticized, as they are just as human and just as error-prone as anyone else.
I barely talk about atheism, but when I do, it seems to be the one thing that both the left and the right get triggered by. In case you didn't know, Ben is an Orthodox Jew.
That's correct, which is why I'm confused as to why he titled his video, Ben Shapiro, Christian Stupidity. He's not a self-identified Christian at all. In fact, he's outright said it explicitly in the past he isn't a Christian. He's an Orthodox Jew. I'm not sure if this applies to Easy or not, but it seems to me when people attack many Orthodox Jews, that's just another way of indirectly attacking Christians. Many Orthodox Jews go out of their way to separate themselves from Christians because of vital theological differences, the most vital being that many of them deny Jesus Christ is the Messiah, while Christians do recognize Jesus is the Messiah and submit themselves to him. It seems like he thinks he necessarily can group Christians and Orthodox Jews in the same context, and that's simply not true.
But he takes his belief in God a little too far. He doesn't just believe in God, no, he knows God exists.
It's one thing not to agree with someone who claims to know God is there, but it's quite another thing to say that because such a claim is made, that means they are quote-unquote going too far. Let's see what he means when he says going too far.
I don't believe in God, I know in God.
This should be an immediate red flag for anybody taking Ben for being a genius.
What exactly does he mean here? Is he implying that Shapiro isn't a genius because he allegedly gets things wrong when talking about God? Or that he isn't a genius when it comes to talking about the subject of God? If the former, just because our friend Easy doesn't personally hold that particular view has no bearing on whether or not Shapiro or anyone else is a genius. Ben could be 100% wrong about everything he says about God, yet still be a genius. Stephen Hawking claimed that philosophy died. That statement is clearly self-refuting and wrong, but that doesn't mean he isn't a genius. If the latter, again, referring to him possibly meaning that Shapiro isn't a genius when it comes to talking about God, then that is quite subjective, which doesn't really amount to a sound argument.
Because this is a fatal mistake that Christian apologists tend to make all the time. No matter how Ben tries to reason it, nobody can know in God.
As to not confuse anyone, the context behind the God specifically being referred to here is the God of the Holy Bible. And how exactly does he know this? That nobody can know in God. He has given no specific argument to back this up. He hasn't in any way shouldered his burden of proof to demonstrate this claim at all. Even most non-believers would agree that it's possible God could exist. Given this possibility, wouldn't such a God, given his attributes and properties, as what Scripture reveals, could very well communicate himself in such a way that his creation could know he exists? So, if it's possible that God exists and can communicate himself in that way, then how can he conclusively say nobody can know in God? He can't. He simply cannot back that up, no matter how much he thinks otherwise.
Nobody can have anything more than faith in God because God is completely impossible to prove.
This is just an outright stupid fallacy. He confuses proof with knowledge. What do I mean by this? Let's say, for example, you met Michael Jordan, but you didn't take a picture with him. You have no proof, no pictures, no video recordings, no anything. Just your personal word you met MJ. Since you lacked the aforementioned things, you clearly cannot prove you met Michael Jordan. Does that mean you didn't therefore know you met Michael Jordan? Of course not. It's simply a non-sequitur fallacy. In other words, it does not follow from the inability to prove something equates to a lack of knowledge about something. And as I've noted in the past, proof is not the same as persuasion. In other words, what constitutes as valid proof for one person may not constitute as valid proof for another. He simply does absolutely nothing to explain what would be valid proof for him one can know in God, rather than simply merely believing in God.
At the end of the day, God's just an idea, and it's definitely impossible to know God exists, let alone know that the Jude God exists.
First of all, holding to a religious criterion for the basis of how you think doesn't necessitate to one putting feelings over facts, nor does denying a religious criterion for the basis of how one thinks necessitates to a person not putting feelings over facts. He seems to be arguing his point on the assumption that one has to put themselves into a spectrum dichotomy of either religion or facts. If this is how he's arguing, then religion or facts is a blatant false dichotomy because it isn't impossible to rationally hold to a religious viewpoint based on certain facts. For example, based on the facts of how many people have torn themselves apart over material possessions, it could be someone's religious view that material possessions should not take priority over things like family, friends, personal health, etc. And second, he is also either ignorant or outright refuses to mention that one does not have to hold to a view in a higher deity to be religious. Hopefully for his sake, it's the former.
So first off, I'm going to show the hypocrisy of Ben taking the approach of facts trump feelings when he goes completely against that when it comes to religion. Take a look at this dude talking to Dennis Prager from Prager University and just watch.
Knowing there is a God, it is a stability giver. It has always been such. There is a God, that God revealed himself at Sinai. These give me great peace. Does that a role it plays for you?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
This is one of the biggest issues I have with religion. It's a classic case of putting feelings over facts. Both Ben and Prager admit that God gives them peace and comfort knowing there's a higher power, believing in something bigger than them. In other words, the belief in God feels good. And why wouldn't it? Believing that some dude created you in his all-powerful image is way more comforting than, believing you're an ape.
That's clearly very subjective, as not all people find the view that they were created by some higher deity comforting at all. Usually in this context, when speaking about the God of the Holy Bible, they find the view of hell absurd, find God's commands absurd, find God's allowing sin to enter the world absurd, etc. It can be argued that it can be very comforting to believe quite the opposite. They were not created, thus not accountable to such a terrible deity as many non-believers have said in their personal view about God. Therefore, it does not necessitate that believing in God equates to feeling more comfortable. I thought this God was about facts over feelings, but clearly he hasn't thought about this point through very well beyond his own feelings.
But still, and out of all people I thought Ben would know this, since when has the truth been comforting? You got no further evidence that God exists other than some 1,000-year-old book.
My friends, I think this is all we needed to hear to have a solid indication this dude has little to no credibility when speaking about the very subject he claims conservatives often get wrong. He is speaking no different than most clueless non-believers on the internet. He has simply regurgitated the same atheistic type nonsense like it's the gospel truth. You just gotta love how he talks so seriously as if he believes he's informed and has a clue what he's talking about. He's like, there is no evidence for God. I guess all these here doesn't constitute as evidence for God, right? Let's give him a moment of silence for his stupidity. Thank you very much, and now we return to our regularly scheduled programming.
You admit that your faith in God is based in the fact that it's more comforting than confronting a pretty fucked reality that God, the God from the Torah, doesn't exist.
I find it very interesting he frames the issue as if discussions about God have only been framed as a world being more messed up if God doesn't exist. I was under the impression that a lot, if not all non-believers, thought quite the opposite, that if God exists, the world is more messed up because in their argument, why would a loving God allow massive suffering in the world to occur? I wasn't aware that the argument is now that taking God out the picture means you're dealing with a world that's pretty screwed up. I thought it was quite the opposite, that a world without such a God existing is an awesome world, as long as religion is removed from it. If the world is so screwed up, then that means man will be the only reason why, if God does not exist. Is he implying that things are all of a sudden wonderful if God exists? I'm not sure what his point really is, if he's even making one at all.
My vision of God, which is I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know what his plan is, but I trust that there is a plan, and I don't have to see his face in order to trust that there's a plan, because I'm not capable of understanding it. But as long as I'm following him, as long as I can see his back, there's a certain level of comfort there.
You can't claim that you put facts over feelings if you admit that a role God plays for you is that it feels good to know there's some all-powerful creator always lurking above you, taking care of you, has a plan for you.
All he's really doing at this point is continuing to double down, triple down, and so forth on his stupidity, based on arguing multiple fallacious premises we've pointed out earlier.
How can such a smart guy, a Harvard graduate, have a serious conversation about not being able to comprehend the face of God?
Speak for yourself, dude. You've made it evidently apparent you're not capable of having a serious conversation about God with the basic fallacies you've committed.
But at the end of the day, believing in God, that's whatever. My big issue with Ben isn't that he believes in a God, it's that when it comes to actual atheism, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Ben wrote an article called Why Atheism is Morally Bankrupt, and his essential argument is that without God, morals crumble and so does society. Let's take a look at the article and see what he has to say. Without God, there's no moral choice. Without God, there's no free will. Ben's entire argument against atheism is that free will is only possible with the existence of a God. So if atheism were true, free will don't exist and we can't judge people for their actions. There's just one problem. He doesn't actually have any fucking evidence.
This guy continues to sound more and more clueless as this video goes on. Shapiro said that we can only condemn people if they are responsible for their actions, and he's 100% correct. How much evidence does he need for that statement? This should automatically be clear to any person using their basic intuitive common sense. How could a world which operates on the foundation of only natural forces be the cause of prescriptive ought behaviors? How does atheism lead to we ought to be responsible for anything?
His argument for atheism being void of free will is that without a God, humans will eventually be able to predict everything that happens in the future. We'd be able to predict all human action. The problem is that Ben assumes that humans will eventually be able to predict everything.
Actually, he never said that anywhere in his article, nor does it appear remotely he ever made such an inference. He said that according to atheists, if we could somehow determine all the constituent parts of the universe, we would be able to predict all human action. Nowhere did he ever say, or appear he even implied, we would be able to predict everything in the future. The very specific point he made on predictability was predicated on the condition if. If is the key word here. If we could somehow determine all the constituent parts of the universe, we would be able to predict all human action. If we could determine such, not we will determine such. It's easier to attack an argument when you make a straw man out of it. So he's dead wrong when saying Shapiro made that assumption. He doesn't even say that knowing more would allow us to predict the future either. How he absolutely strawmanned Shapiro's point this badly is way beyond me. It seems to me this guy is simply reading into stuff that simply isn't there, and he's possibly doing it deliberately.
And he also assumes that knowing more will eventually allow us to predict the future. Right now, the overwhelming scientific consensus is that free will does exist. He doesn't have an argument for free will not existing if there's no God. It's all based off assumptions and what may or may not happen in the future. Human equality must spring from a creator, because the soul is all that makes man human and equal. Biology suggests a sort of social Darwinism embraced by dictators.
It's very interesting and quite hilarious. He just said that Shapiro didn't give an argument for how free will couldn't exist without God, yet he just read part of the argument Shapiro was given to show just that. And note what he doesn't show here, which is later on down in the article, which I have highlighted in blue here. If there is no God, there is no freedom to choose. If there is no freedom to choose, there is no good or evil. There is merely action and inaction. There is no way to be good for goodness sake. That would require an act of voluntary will far beyond human capacity. Atheists simply gloss over this point. If you would like to read the whole article, the link to it is in the description. Now, I'm not saying he has to agree with Shapiro's argument, but to claim he didn't give an argument at all is simply flat out false. It seems another moment of silence is in order for his stupidity. Thanks again, and now we return back to our regularly scheduled programming.
This is another issue with Christians and Muslims that they assume about atheists all the time, that they think that we should live by natural selection and social Darwinism. Then, the vast majority of atheists want secularism. They believe in freedom of speech and religion and all that good shit.
And abortion too, which is literally murdering your own children. Yet pretending they aren't children and or they don't deserve legal protection certainly does not mirror elements of natural selection and social Darwinism. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, it does. And although not every atheist agrees abortion should be legal, the vast majority of atheists I've met in my lifetime seem to have no issue with it. And I've come across thousands of atheists in my lifetime.
And you don't have to believe in God to believe in these enlightenment values, not Christian enlightenment values. And the Constitution, Ben, the same supreme law that gives you all the rights that you have, doesn't even bother to mention God once.
This is just a fallacious argument from silence. This in no way proves the founding fathers had no influence directly or indirectly from God as being the foundational influence and inspiration of the Constitution. It certainly does not mean that the Constitution is expressing atheism either. And sure, atheists can hold to such values, but as Shapiro pointed out, atheism can work for individuals, but not as the basis for a functional state.
Ben talks a little more about why he thinks atheism is immoral in this video. Check this out.
Free will is at the center of the criminal justice system. I believe that the argument in favor of free will has to rest on supernatural premises.
So you admit that free will can't be proven. You admit that free will can't be studied or measured or even verified at all, because anything that rests on the supernatural can never rest on facts.
That's not at all what he said, and he seems to yet again commit the fallacy of a false dichotomy, that if the supernatural is not based on facts and only faked, or if facts, it is impossible for the supernatural to exist based on facts. He clearly hasn't looked into the studies into the supernatural and continues to regurgitate typical atheistic type, easily debunked nonsense.
Essentially, Ben is admitting that his argument for free will is based entirely on what he can't prove or verify, because like I said, it's impossible to prove the existence of God.
He just sounds like a broken record at this point, continuing the same flawed argument here I already addressed earlier when speaking about the no in God point Shapiro said near the beginning of this video. Moving on.
Because otherwise, what you're basically saying is that human beings are a combination of their genetics and their environment. And if we just had a giant machine and we could pour all that information into a machine, then I could predict with perfect certainty what you were going to say next.
No. Saying humans are just a result of their genetics and environment, that's some tremendous oversimplification of how humans work. Our brain is what gives us free will.
How could he possibly know that? You should see how he tries to argue for this.
and there's an entire science trying to figure out how that thing works. The human brain relies on way more than just genetics and environment. It elicits different reactions based on emotion, knowledge, personality, drugs, and even if you can somehow iron down somebody's emotions and personality and their state of mind, you can never predict with absolute certainty what a human will do or say, because even if somebody goes through the exact same state of mind twice or thrice times, with all the same emotions running through, they can have an entirely different reaction each time. It means that free will exists without the need for a god.
I'm failing to see where he has shown anywhere that when everything is exactly the same, different results can still arise. How does he know that different results isn't actually evidence the conditions were in fact different, although may have simply appeared the same as other cases? Furthermore, even if we assume the conditions were truly the same as other cases, yet yielded different results, how is that evidence free will exists without a God? That's just a total non-sequitur argument. That's not necessarily proof of free will without God. That's just saying you have three letters, A, C, and T. Sure, you can get different words from the same conditioning of the A, C, and T letters, but there is a limit to the number of words those three letters can spell out if you were to put them into a machine. Getting different responses from the same conditions doesn't prove free will exists without a God. It simply proves that only a limited number of different responses can occur given those specific conditions.
Ben Shapiro's a smart guy, but he follows the same conservatism as dudes like Cruz and Hannity do. When it comes to God, he goes completely against the principle of facts trump feelings. And when it comes to atheism, his entire problem with it is based on assumptions, ideas, and no actual verifiable facts. So regardless of whether you're left-wing or right-wing, facts trump feelings, always.
It's quite interesting he says facts always trumps feelings, when in the vast majority of this video, he only relied upon his feelings that the typical regurgitated arguments were actually sound arguments, rather than doing his own extensive research. Just because he feels one cannot know God exists doesn't make it so. Just because he feels that it's more comforting to think one was created by God rather than an ape doesn't make it so. Just because he feels there is no further evidence for God beyond the Bible doesn't make it so. I could go on and on with more examples of him arguing his feelings rather than facts, but I think you all get the point. My friends, he's just yet another non-believer pontificating as if he thinks he remotely has a clue of what he's talking about, when all he's really done is just reveal how massively ignorant he is. Well, that's it for this video. As always, I just can't say it enough how much I appreciate the continued support from all of you. And please like this video, share this video, and subscribe. Until next time, peace everyone.